Tape Deck Media.
Step right up. Listen to the Awful Service Podcast. It's future radio on your computer phone. You've heard of Hannah and Barbera, Laurel and Hardy, Sears and Roebuck, now Doyle and Cocazello. Are you a bean counter at your boring job? Listen to the Awful Service Podcast. We've got segments, we've got guests, we've got Karens.
The Awful Service Podcast, available where all podcasts are streamed. Brought to you by Tape Deck Media.
Riddle me this, riddle me that. We got the riddles that'll make you chat. Oh yeah, baseline stuff been through this tight. Get your funk on, we're rocking tonight. One more time.
Welcome, Roddle Maniacs, to another episode of Roddle Me This. Once again, I am, as always, your faithful host, Taylor Vamper Needs to Lose Weight Roddle. That name will become clear as we get into this chat. Today, I'm joined on the pod by repeat offender and faithful guest on the podcast, Hamish Mabon-Ross. Hello, Hamish.
Hello. How's it going, Taylor?
We're both being hit by coughing fits, so there might be some random pauses in the video, in the podcast, which I'll try to get in post. Mine is because of choking on a waffle just before. How about yourself?
About a week or two ago, I got a bit sick and just have this lingering cough that
yes,
kind of sucks. Just stuff. You feel like there's stuff in your throat.
It's awful. Yeah. I feel like I've had that for 4 or 5 years now, and I think it's just getting old and having a baritone voice. I don't know if I'm baritone, but I'm definitely low. And I remember, what are you laughing at?
It looked like you were about to cough.
This podcast is just going to be us asking a really like a real leading question to get the other person to talk for a long amount of time so that we can mute ourselves and cough at the time. Hamish, what is your opinion on trade reform in the Soviet Union? I can't find the mute button. God damn it.
You did that thing where you take a big breath in, you're like, and I was like, oh, here it comes.
Here it comes.
Dear.
Oh, dear me. So, Hamish, delightful to have you back. I always enjoy bringing you on the podcast. We thought it would be cool. I actually didn't realize you had read them as well, but we were going to talk about the, I think the author as a whole, Darren Shan, but how much of Darren's work have you read yourself?
Well, when you'd mentioned the theme for today, I did go and have a look because I couldn't remember how many of his books I had read.
Yeah.
I think I've probably only read, definitely 3, maybe 4 or 5.
And this is the Vampire series?
Yeah, see, it's weird because Wikipedia, it says it's the Darren Shan saga.
Yeah.
But I've always known it as the Cirque Du Freak saga.
Yeah,
or the Cirque Du Freak books or whatever. But
one of the books that I'm holding right now, which is not going to be useful at all for the audio listeners, it's one of the most iconic covers. It's the circus writing, and it has the spider, and it just says Cirque Du Freak on it, and the author's name is tiny up in the corner, and then on the back, Cirque Du Freak, and like Cirque Du Freak is the name of the first book, but I think because Darren is Irish, I think. Like he's Irish, but he lives in London, and I think there's been so many attempts at localizing his work into America, and so probably by calling it Cirque Du Freak in America, they maybe felt that would catch better than the Saga of Darren Shan, which is what it's known as over here.
Yeah, because his name's like Darren O'Shaughnessy, right? Like
and now that I hear you pronouncing, I'm suddenly worried I've been pronouncing his name incorrectly the whole time. Because O'Shaughnessy, it would be Darren Shawn, wouldn't it?
Nah, I think Shan or Shan. Because some people I think say Shaughnessy, Shannessy. I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard O'Shaughnessy. Well, I'm going to keep referring to him as Shan, but the listeners, if they know better, can correct me on that one. He's actually done several series of books. He's done quite a lot of books, but I think he's most well known for the vampire books. And then afterwards, he did a series about demons, which became very cosmic horror towards the end. So I don't know, that
Okay.
actually seems like it might be up your alley a little bit. And then he started a series called Zom-B, which he was tackling zombies. And I read the first three
So
or
it wasn't
so.
just a clever name.
Huh?
So it wasn't just a clever name, calling it Zom-B, and it's about zombies.
Yeah, well, the main character's name is B. And so let's just get into it here. This is going to be a spoilery podcast. So if you haven't read any of his books, I'll give you the quick pitch for the vampires one, because that'd be the one I'd recommend you start with. Main character, Darren, is like, I don't know, maybe he's 13 or something. He's around that age, I think, kind of just in high school, maybe. And he attends a freak show circus called the Cirque Du Freak, and he ends up stealing a spider because he's into spiders. He steals a spider that you can control by playing this magical flute thing, and he steals it from one of the performers called Larton Crepsley, who's a vampire. I don't think he knows he's a vampire until later on, but
I think in the intro of him, they're like, "Oh, he's a vampire. Ooh, spooky man!" And he's got like a spider and stuff. I think that's how they play it. I've completely forgotten about the spider.
Yeah, well, the spider. That's why on the cover, the fact that there's a spider is like, oh yeah, that's right. Madame Octa is like
Madame Octa. That's her name. I was like, it's Mrs. or something,
Madame
but
Octa,
no.
So he gets distracted for a second playing the flute, and it bites his friend right on the neck. And so he has to go and find Larton Crepsley to get the antidote. And then in the process of this happening, his best friend, who's a bit of a sociopath kind of kid, I think today would be looking at him very differently than he was looked at back then. He comes along and wants to become a vampire. And Larton tastes his blood and says, no, you've got evil blood, so I'm not gonna turn you. But for some reason, he's fine with turning Darren, and then the whole series kind of kicks off from there, as the first book is called The Vampire's Assistant, I think. Or is the first book called...
No, the first book is Cirque Du Freak is the first one, Vampire's Assistant, the second one.
There you go. And then the third one, which I've got here, which has a freaking iconic cover, it's called Tunnels of Blood, and it has that purple hand on the front, which... So the reason it's purple will become clear in a little bit. So that's the setup of the series. If that sounds like a bit of you, go and read that now. But from now on, this is a full nostalgia chat. So we're going to be jumping around. We're going to be all over the show, and there's going to be spoilers galore. So if you're going to go read it, we'll talk to you later on. Thank you for listening so far. Hey Ramblers, I'm going to be recording my second ever full-length comedy special, Taylor Ruddle, Panic at the Buffet, on the 26th of October. It's a Saturday from 8:30, and I would absolutely love it if you could be there. In Panic at the Buffet, I explore 5 different experiences from my life where I started overthinking, panicked, and then did something that I regretted at the time, but make for entertaining stories in hindsight. Some of the experiences in question include buying clothes as a plus-size man, trying to spell my name over the phone, a little white lie to a cashier that got out of hand, trying not to frighten women on the street at nighttime, and of course, the buffet. It all culminates at the end when I have the chance to step up and be a hero, having finally got a handle on my awkwardness. Or have I? Come along and find out what happened. The reviewer Bad Apple described this show as a fantastic investigation into the effects of anti-intellectualism in New Zealand, of self-realization, and the true dangers of small-town Foursquare check-ins. I was nominated for the Best Comic at the 2023 Nelson Fringe Festival, and I won the New Zealand Comedy Guild Breakout Comedian of the South Island 2023. So it's gonna be a really funny show. There's some early bird tickets available for $15, but general admission is $20. You can get those from littleandromeda.co.nz. This one is going to be my last full-hour show for a couple of years, as I want to spend the time following this building up the podcast and other kind of online content. So if you've been meaning to come out and see me at a comedy show, you just haven't got around to it yet, this is pretty much your last chance to see me doing an hour for a couple of years. So I highly recommend you come out and have a giggle with me. Ticketing link is also in the show notes. Thank you, and back to the show. Let's get into it. So, why did I suddenly give the spoilers warning? I think it was for Zom-B. So after the first book, the thing that I always liked about them as a child is they're written in the first person, which I found way easier to follow. And the first book, B, the main character, is only referred to as like sort of gender neutral pronouns. And then it turns out at the end of the first book that B is short for Becky and B is actually a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a reason for this. I believe Darren has gone on the record to say that because Zom-B deals with race quite a bit. B's father is a racist, like England for the English, kind of that sort of thing, guy. And so I think B describes themselves as having like a buzz cut haircut and is quite butch and everything like that. And Darren has gone on to say that he wrote B ambiguously like that to play with the reader's expectations that, you know, you're picturing a little skinhead boy, but it's actually a girl. And that was the kind of, and if you Google Zom-B, one of the first few questions to come up was like, you know, am I the only one that didn't realize B was a girl until the end? So I think he did quite a good job of, you know, getting people to Google his work. So, but yes, that was his sort of third. Why? I guess they're young adult books. I'm not quite sure. They're quite gory at times.
I think they are. Like, well, I mean, for me, when the first one came out for the Cirque Du Freak saga, I think it would have been about 2001 or two, and so I'd have been right. 13-ish, roundabout. So yeah, I think they were probably more aimed at, I don't know, early to mid-teens.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing that drew me to the books initially was that what I liked about them was that a lot of the books I'd read up until that point were very flowery and very like I don't know, when you're like a sort of 13-year-old boy, you find a lot of that stuff like cringe or unnecessary. And so the books were very to the point, and the characters would swear and they would say, like, they would use words like crap, which to me as a child, I was like, man, they're talking how people that I know talk. And like, I think at the time, this seemed like a new trope to me, but you know, the whole like our vampires are different trope where like in Twilight, they've got the sparkling marble creatures, and then in the Magnus archives, they're like big leeches, and Dresden Files, they're like I don't know what they are in Dresden Files. They're like bats, which big grotesque bat things that sort of pretend to be humans. They can sort of have like a meat suit, I guess. And what I liked about the vampires in this is that they were like, you know, about as realistic as you could think. You know, at that age, they seemed very realistic. Like they didn't have fangs. They had sharp nails, which they would just use to cut a little hole into the victim's neck while they were sleeping. And then they didn't have to drink them completely dry. They could just take enough to survive. Like they did need blood. That was a key thing for them. I think animal blood didn't work for the full-blooded vampires. I think when Darren changes, because there's a big arc in the second or third book, about him not wanting to drink human blood, and he starts getting weaker. And I think he has animal's blood for a little bit, but eventually he's going to die unless he has some human blood.
Yeah, I vaguely recall him. I think he drinks deer blood or something for a time. There's a lot of talk about him chasing down animals and drinking deer blood instead.
Yeah. And one of the cool things I liked about this series is that if you drink someone completely dry, you kind of absorb their soul a little bit. And so his what was the kid called? He has because in the Cirque Du Freak, the second book, they kind of go on tour with the traveling circus, and Darren, I think, performs. I don't know what Darren does. I feel like he's
just the vampire's assistant.
Yeah, maybe that's
he just helps. He helps Mr. Crepsley with his various bits.
He there's like a wolf man who's not a werewolf or anything. He's like something gone wrong with his DNA, and he's kind of like a mindless beast.
Is it Ezra?
No, his friend was called Sam, I think. Sam Crest, maybe.
Wait, which friend? Like his his friend that gets bitten by the spider?
Oh no, that was Steve, and he sort of disappears but comes back later on. Then he becomes friends with the snake boy in the circus, which is Ezra Vaughn. And then
That's the one.
they meet that local boy called Sam Crest, who is obsessed with eating pickled onions. And actually recently I tasted pickled onions for the first time. I didn't even really know where to find them, but I always remember it from the book. And I actually don't mind them. Have you ever eaten them before?
Oh, I love a pickled onion, mate.
Can't get enough of them.
Perfect midnight snack is pickled onions, and then just like you cut like a decent chunk off some cheese. That's all you
Oh
need.
shit. Yeah, okay, now we're talking.
But it also depends what kind of pickled onions you want. If you want like the white cocktail onions, they're the smaller ones, or you
I
get
find
like
those hard to eat, yeah.
brown pickled onions, like the slightly bigger ones.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
I've
It's
got
Sam Grest, by the way. You were
Greece, there you
close.
go. Yeah, I've got some that are in my larder pantry, whatever you call it, that are like pre-sliced, and I find those a lot easier to eat. I don't like that. You know when you got a bite and it goes through the whole onion like that?
Yeah.
It feels a bit much for me, but
Oh, no, I love that. That's the appeal.
yeah. So he eats Sam gets sort of mauled by the wolf man, and Darren, it's essentially like, well, he's going to die anyways, so I'll put him out of his misery. And so Darren kind of drinks him dry, and then from that day onwards, Darren has like got sort of a weird craving for pickled onions. It sort of stays with him.
Far out. It's been so long. I've forgotten so much of these.
Yeah.
I remember being obsessed with the third book, but
third book was great. So we can get onto that one now, actually, because I've got the book next to me here. And because the third book is kind of when it's almost like summer is over and we're on to the real plot now, because the first one is him learning some bits and pieces about being a vampire. The second one, they're just traveling with the Cirque, and it's not really, there's no big villain or anything. And then in the third one, they meet their first Vampanese, which is where the vampire needs to lose weight joke comes from. The Vampanese, they're basically a different tribe of vampires, I guess, right?
I think, well, yeah, that they've sort of become a tribe or their own kind of offset kind of group, but they're all just vampires. It's just
they're all kind of
how
the
they
same.
behave.
They have the same powers. So, like, obviously, the vampires have all the standard superheroes. They're faster than humans. They're stronger than humans. They can't come out during the day. Well, they can, but for only really short amount of time. Like I remember there was a book later on where Darren, because Darren's only half vampire, he's Blade basically. He's the day walker.
Yeah.
If you're only half vampire, you can come out in the daytime. And whereas because Mr. Crepsley was full vampire, he had to sleep during the day. And I remember there was one book where they came out of some sewers and they had to really quickly get like underground again because it was daytime, and they they lathered Mr. Crepsley with like, you know, SPF 200 or something, as much as they could find, put a bunch of blankets on him and everything. But then even then he was still like raw, like he'd been burnt, like the worst sunburn you've ever seen after just a couple of minutes in the sun. So yeah, they do still die in the sun. And then they could also breathe out a gas which would knock people out, which was like how they would kind of feed, is that they would knock someone out with the gas. Then they would just cut a little hole in their neck with the sharp nails. And then I think their saliva had like healing magic where they would just put some saliva on the cut and then it would heal back up like nothing had happened. So, you know, they would basically just sneak into someone's house, spray a bit of gas on them to keep them asleep, take as much blood as they needed without killing them, and then leave again with like healing them.
Yeah, I vaguely remember maybe in the first or second, probably the second book, they would like kidnap people on the street a little bit. Like they would find people walking alone late at night and knock them out and quickly have a wee drink.
I remember Darren
really looking back on it, you're like,
yeah, a little bit sort of
maybe some problems.
What are they breathing? Rohypnol or something out of their mouth? And doesn't it? Yeah. So imagine someone's trying to explain that to the police. No, sir, I wasn't using a DRD. I'm a vampire. I just breathed gas that knocked people out. And but yeah, I remember Darren, one of his tasks would be to find random people out at night, knock them out, collect a little bit of blood in a vial, and then bring that to Cripsley for when he wakes up. The vampires still had to eat normal food, I think. I remember that was a big thing in this. They still had to eat regular food. They just also needed to have blood.
Okay, because then there's heaps of like other vampire lore where it's like, oh, we can't eat normal food at all. Like it makes us violently ill, or like it could kill us.
Yeah. I think in Twilight they had to throw it back up later. Like they could eat, but because they were basically just marble statues brought to life, and so like I guess their stomach wouldn't go anywhere. Maybe.
Great teaching those young adults about bulimia.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah. And so then the Vampanese, they were this other tribe where they believed it was disrespectful to only drink a little bit. They thought that if you're going to drink someone's blood, you should like drain them completely dry. And that was what I found so interesting as a child, was that like the Vampanese weren't necessarily presented as being evil. In many ways, they were almost presented as being a little bit more honorable than the vampires. Because I remember the thing that used to appeal to me as a kid was that the vampires found it like, I don't know if not illegal, like dishonorable to use projectile weapons. So you'd never see them using guns or arrows or anything like that. There was one guy that used to throw throwing stars, but he didn't see that as a projectile weapon because it was still him throwing it. But the Vampanese were like even more, they were like purists. Like they wouldn't even throw spears and stuff like that. They would be like, absolutely no. Basically, if it's going to leave our hand, we're not going to use it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the Vampanese had their whole thing of like, because you take a little bit of the person's soul with you, they kind of saw that as like, we're carrying them with us. Like they didn't see it as a bad thing, I suppose. And so the consequence of drinking massive amounts of blood was that all of the Vampanese, their skin would turn purple. I think their eyes and their fingernails would turn red. Maybe their hair turned red as well, I think.
I had the vaguest feeling that their hair turns red as well, but maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
I'm just going to Google that because I know they did a movie which is like
that was just the first book, really.
Yeah, and they changed quite a lot about, well, they honestly grabbed stuff from like later in the series and brought it much earlier so that it happened in the first book.
Okay.
At the end of that. Yeah, I think their hair does turn red. Yeah, but Vampanese sound quite horrifying. They're these sort of blotchy purple-skinned, red-haired, red-eyed humans who
it's interesting though that you say that you see them as being like more honorable, because I don't know, maybe it was just me reading it. I always kind of read them as just being gluttonous. That they're just like, we don't care. Yeah. Like this is our true nature. We're vampires. We're better than humans. We should be allowed to drink them as much as we want. Why should we like be nice to them? Who cares? We're gods compared to them, kind of thing. That was always more the vibe that I got, was that they're just like, I don't care.
Yeah, I think that could be valid. I just remember one of the Vampanese was justifying it to them, and I was like, well, okay, so they're not just mindless monsters. Like they do think they're doing the right thing in their culture, I guess. But you're right. Like the first Vampanese they meet is called Murloc, I think. Murloc. I don't know how you pronounce it. Murlough. And
it'd be Merlot. He's
like an obese. He's been going on like a feeding frenzy, I think, in Mr. Cripsley's hometown. And he's this big fat. I think he wears like a pristine white suit. I think that was his look. But he's this big, obese, purple-skinned monster, basically. And what I liked, do you remember the fight that he had with Mr. Cripsley?
Maybe.
One of the things I quite liked about Darren Shan was that it used to dispel a lot of tropes and rumors and that kind of thing. Like, Darren was expecting that once he becomes a vampire, he's going to be able to turn into bats and all this kind of thing. And Mr. Cripsley basically laughs at him and he's like, you watch too many movies. Like, this is what we actually do. Like, for some reason, he thought that vampires wouldn't be able to use like public transport, but they catch trains and buses and all that kind of thing. And like they use hotels when he needs to sleep and all that kind of thing. And he said, it was in a bedroom, I think. They ended up cornering Merlot. Merlot, that's how you pronounce it?
Merlot, yeah. I
Merlot.
think it would be. But I don't know. I think Darren's probably the only person who would know.
Yeah.
For certain.
Yeah. And so Darren in his head's thinking like, oh, this is going to be an epic fight. He was expecting them to be fighting all over the room, and there'd be, Mr. Cripsley would take out a sword, and so would Merlot, and then they would be sort of accumulating little cuts over their bodies until eventually one of them strikes a big killing blow. But it was over in a flash. Like, I think the whole fight was Mr. Cripsley threw a knife, Merlot ducked it, Mr. Cripsley lunged over to him in an instant. Merlot took like a swing with one of his butcher knives, and then Mr. Cripsley just stabbed him in the stomach with his hand, and
that's right.
There was then Merlot just fell over and died basically. And yeah, I just remember liking that about the series, that it seemed very that's actually how it would happen if these two predators basically were, be like watching two lions fight each other kind of thing. It'd be over with one strike sort of thing. So I quite liked that.
Correct me if I'm wrong. This is just, I'm getting vague memories from over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That's horrible to say.
It is, eh?
The Vampanese.
Yes.
They all have names that start with M.
So there is Curtis Maltz is one of them. I don't think so.
I think they've all got an M name, or like an M somewhere in their name or something.
Possibly. So there's Vancha, who's one of the good guys. There's the book gets very YA in the second trilogy, I think, which is the Vampire Right, because I've got these books. Yeah. This will be the cover to the podcast, will be the covers of the books, I think. The second trilogy is the Vampire Rights trilogy, RITES. And that feels very chosen one, young adult, where Darren, he's 12, but he becomes one of the vampire princes because I think there's some technicality, some loophole where they're going to have to kill him because he did something against the vampire code. But
I think him existing is against the code, right?
I think so. Yeah,
Cripsley shouldn't have turned him.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I think children. They're not supposed to turn children.
Yeah,
and he has to do some trials. I remember he has to enter some room that shoots fire out of the walls and the floor and stuff. He has to survive in there for a certain amount of time, and he does barely. He has to do something.
I've remembered something else. Sorry to interrupt.
No, please go ahead.
How Cripsley turns Darren into a vampire has just come back to me.
Oh, the fingertips?
He cuts the tips of his fingers and then cuts Darren's fingertips, and they join fingers for a certain amount of time.
That's right.
And he can feel the vampire blood going into him, and he has to stop because he's like, no, I'm not giving you full powers yet. Yeah. And then later on, he does it again to complete the transformation. Weird. That was just buried somewhere deep down.
What happens is he goes through something called the purge, which is after a certain amount of time, his vampire cells start becoming stronger, and so he's a little kid for ages. I think he's 13 or 14 or something for a while, and then in one of the Vampire Rights books, he goes through the purge and he gets taller suddenly overnight, and he suddenly looks like a I don't know, 17-year, 18-year-old maybe.
Oh, okay. So he goes through rapid puberty.
Yeah. It's they're young for ages, and then all of a sudden they age up, and then again it happens later on. I think the purge happens twice, and then after the second one, you're a full vampire. But he later on, so the story gets so convoluted later on. There's after about the third trilogy, I kind of drop off a little bit. I liked the traveling in the countryside and fighting rogue Vampanese, but when it becomes this big war between the vampires and the Vampanese, and there's they start involving humans in the war, and it lost me a little bit because I don't know, the scale just was huge, and I did read it and stuff. But
Steve comes back at some point as well, because he's sort of, from the first book, he kind of, even though Darren became a vampire to save Steve's life, Steve kind of vows to destroy all vampires and stuff. And
Steve never had a happy life. His mum was a gambler or a drunk or something, and so he had nothing, and he felt like Darren took away the one thing that he wanted and all this sort of thing. I'm just seeing now we're coming up to the end of the Zoom. Do you want to keep going with this, or should we wrap it up there?
Oh, we could wrap it up. It's fine.
Righto.
Just whatever.
So where was I going with that? The vampire rights. Like another thing that's wild is like Steve, like shags Darren's sister, and they have a kid together or something, and then that kid is like half Vampanese, and so Darren does the fingertips thing to like turn him from half Vampanese to half vampire,
right?
Which is weird because that does seem to indicate that the difference between vampire and Vampanese is not just tribal. They're actually a different kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know I always assumed it was like you start off as a vampire, and if you manage to kind of restrain yourself, you stay a vampire. But if you go a bit crazy, then you become a Vampanese. Yeah. I just want to talk about the demons ones that I want to tell you about the Demonata saga, which I've got in front of me here somewhere. So the one I've got here is called Demon Thief. This was the first one I read because back when you were a kid, you sort of were just limited to what the local library had. And this is like book 3, I think, book 2 or 3. And the Demonata series was interesting because it was like grounded in some ways, but then in others, it gets real cosmic horror at the end. Like the demons that you're fighting, you think they're just coming over from like hell or something, but the whole thing turns out to be like a big multiverse. The demons come to a planet, they completely take it over, then they start looking for a way to get to the next planet, and it's very multiverse, it's very cosmic horror. It doesn't always start off that way, but this book that I've got here, Demon Thief, was fascinating. It starts off with such a good hook where the main character, he can see these little patches of like light. They're all just different geometric shapes, like triangles and stuff floating around. And he's the only one that can see them. And he used to talk about them when he was a kid, but then his parents started like taking him to psychologists and stuff. And so he thought, okay, I'm going to stop talking about these. And he could sort of push them around with his hands and slot them together. And he eventually finds out that he can make portals by putting a bunch of them together and visualizing a place that he wants to go. He can create portals. And the one thing that was cool about it is because he's the only one that can see them, later on, they're at some rave or something, and the guys there with it like, okay, there's a demon or there's a warlock here who's trying to put together a portal, but we don't know who it is. And he just points out, he's like, him. They're all gathering, all the lights are gathering around him, and they're like, what lights? And he's like, don't worry about it, just get him. So like other wizards can do it. They can summon these little squares of light to create a portal, but it takes hours, whereas Colonel is the main guy. He can just push them together in 10 minutes or something, and then they've got a portal.
Again, the chosen one, the Luke Skywalker, whatever.
The three characters. So another book that I've got here is called Beck, which is apparently one that a lot of people don't like, which I really enjoyed. It's back in the, I don't know, maybe the like hundreds, the year hundreds maybe. Beck, she's like a priestess, I guess. She's living in one of those, like the Irish or the Scottish, they would have those like those ring forts, the raths, that would just be like sharpened sticks outwards. And so she's living in one of these little villages. That's in the daytime they're safe, but at nighttime demons come and they all have to fight them off. And she ends up they're long long plot story, but they end up trying to close a wormhole thing for demons to get across into their world. And maybe that was the first attempt for the stronger, because there's like demons are separated into like basically corpses that come back to life. They're like the lowest version. Then there's like demons that will be like a combination of certain monsters. It'll be like the body of a bear with the head of an alligator with human hands, or that kind of, they're all sort of mashed together. And then there's the demon masters or demon lords, I think, who are like much creepier, and they can use magic and that sort of thing, and they're all much more powerful than the other ones. And so I think the whole story is humans and stuff get convinced that the promise of power and riches and that kind of thing. So we'll make a wormhole to let these demon lords get across, which it never works out like that. The demon lords nearly always end up slaughtering them straight away. So yes, 3 minutes left in the Zoom call. Anything else that you remember about the Darren Shan books?
I remember, I think the bit that I'm just starting to remember is when, I think it's the 4th book, Vampire Mountain, when they're like, oh, we've got to go to the big vampire commune, like we're having a big meeting, so everyone's got to go there.
Yeah.
And he's like, Mr. Krebsley's carrying Darren across country as they flit. Is flitting what they do?
Yeah.
Super when they're just like sprinting at super speed across the country and stuff.
Apparently, it feels more like they're making the world go by faster than them necessarily running quicker or something. Yeah, that was, I think as well, there was some weird ability that Krebsley had where doing that builds up static electricity. So he uses that to open windows and locks and stuff like that, which I don't know if is a real thing you can do, but he would click his fingers and then a fucking window would open or something. And you're like, what? That doesn't seem real. It seems like actual magic.
Did they do, I can't remember, did they do vampire lore where everyone gets their own special power?
No, I don't think so.
It's like, oh, you get this power, but it's like all vampires, same powers, basically.
I think so, yeah. I think maybe the princes they had some kind of psychic link or something, but there was also a split where Prince's blood was slightly different, because when Darren became a prince, he had to join fingers with all the princes and they put some like prince blood into him. So it is very like eugenics-y now that I think about it.
We're going to kill the weak part of you.
Yeah, the human side. All right, well, let's wrap that up there. That went by in an instant. Thank you for joining me as always, Hamish.
Thank you for having me as always.
What have you got on for the rest of the day? You just chilling?
Just chilling. Maybe do some practice, do some study.
I myself, I'm going to go
usual uni student things.
I myself, I'm going to go buy a bucket and some rice and do some dirty rice exercises, as they call it, which listeners of the show.
Monk.
Yeah, exactly. All the listeners of the show hear me complaining about my fucking hands for 2 years at this point. All the other physio stuff I've been doing hasn't, it's gotten them better to a certain point, but we'll see if this helps. I've watched a few videos on it last night and doing certain exercises with your hands in a bucket of rice because of the resistance, I guess.
If you've watched a few videos on YouTube, you're practically an expert now anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
So the internet works. You can start selling products now. It's fine.
Hell yeah. All right, Hame. Thank you so much for joining me, man. We'll catch you next time.
Sweet. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Ruddle Me This. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can find me on social media at Taylor Ruddle Comedy on all the major platforms. You can also join patreon.com/Taylor Ruddle Comedy for free, which gets you access to all sorts of extras and behind the scenes content, as well as allows you to communicate directly with me and let me know what you think of the show. Tune in again next Monday for another episode of Ruddle Me This, and until then, ruddle her out.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.
Hey Ruddlers, I joined a group of podcasters that we are calling the Trailer Alliance, a group of podcasters that share each other's trailers at the end of the episodes and generally support each other. So at the end of each episode for the next few weeks, I'm going to be playing a trailer of one of the members of the Trailer Alliance. And here's one of them now. I hope you like it.
Are you struggling with a lack of access to captivating entertainment and media? Are you faced with constant judgment and ridicule from friends and family for your inability to respond appropriately to sensitive situations? If this sounds like you might be suffering from being emotionally dead inside. But it's not too late to make a change. One Nothing Podcast is a newly available treatment for being dead inside. Taken just once every 2 weeks, One Nothing could make a world of difference. By combining carefully measured dark humor to the amazing original formula of grisly fatalities, One Nothing Podcast has successfully entertained thousands of people suffering from death inside. And with access across all podcast platforms, treatment has never been more readily available. But don't trust my word. Here's some real-world testimonials from a few of our listeners currently undergoing treatment.
From consistent doses of One Nothing podcast, my posture has greatly improved due to being kept on the edge of my seat.
The One Nothing podcast comes on, everybody be like, shut the f*** up. I'll be quiet, but when the episode's over, I'll be talking again.
Oh my gosh, buddy. I used to be on so many medications for blood pressure, and then I listened to One Nothing Podcast's episode on Kitty Genovese, moved into an apartment on my own, and haven't needed it since. That one really got my blood pumping.
You know, listening to One Nothing Podcast, I'm not constipated anymore. I'm just full of shit.
So what's stopping you from great entertainment?
One Nothing Podcast is not intended for all audiences. Listeners under 18 years of age should obtain permission from your parent or guardian before downloading. Tell your therapist if you're predisposed to whining, complaining, reading podcasts poorly, being overall combative, or being easily offended, as One Nothing Podcast might not be right for you.
So stop letting great content pass you by. Talk to your therapist today to see if One Nothing Podcast is right for you.